Welcome everybody to Game Retail Ramblings, episode number 22. I'm your host, Travis Severance, coming you live from Millennium Game Studios in very wet, tropical wetlands, sort of like Florida, Rochester, New York today. We got rain all week long, and my basement's not flooded, but it probably should be given how much water we've been getting. So thanks for everybody for tuning in today. We're going a little bit early because my producers are headed to beautiful Austin, Texas for Yu-Gi-Oh! Nationals, and I'm headed out to do a store visit for the next couple of days as well. So I've got things going on my end, and I think we've got a pretty wild and busy weekend as well. Thanks to everybody that stopped in and checked out the last video. Obviously, Star Wars Unlimited is pretty popular to you folks out there. My views are always incredible when I do Star Wars Unlimited content, to the point where maybe I should just switch to be a full-time SWU channel. But I think there's a lot of people out there doing that, so I'm gonna give them their space to be able to manage that. And honestly, I can't keep my attention long enough with anything anyway to do it. We're gonna talk about Altered today. It's been quite a while since we talked about the Altered TCG. In fact, episode 1 was the first time, my intro to all of you, with bags under my eyes and terribly orange skin and pretty awful as far as videos go. But in general, it was well watched, and I was talking all about Altered TCG because I felt like it was a time when they were sort of gearing up for their Kickstarter. Their Kickstarter hadn't really launched yet, and people were sort of talking about the game and what the game was going to be like, and I had a lot of opportunities to be able to check the game out. So my introduction to Altered, and I'll go back, apologies to those of you who watched the first episode, but I'm going to do a little bit intro on myself with Equinox, the publisher. It was about a year ago at this point. I was invited by Asmodee's marketing team to go and check out a new project, and I walked over to Lucas Oil Field. I was greeted by a handful of people, none of which I knew, which is fairly odd for me. I've been around this industry for 23 or 24 years at this point, so it's not often that I walk into a room in the industry and I don't know anybody. And they showed me this wildly ambitious game. Beautiful artwork. I got introduced to the team, Equinox, which is owned and operated by Régis Bonasset. He is well known in the board game space. He used to own, and he started up Libellude, which they've made some just fantastic board games that sell really well today, and just beautiful artwork. So Mysterium, Dixit, Seasons, Dice Forge, some really innovative stuff, some different things too. And the look of it is just absolutely gorgeous. And immediately I could see that same sort of artistic prowess when I looked at the cards for this, the card backs, the different things that they were doing with this game in general. It had his name, it had his look all over it. And then the gameplay itself was innovative and unique too, in a couple of different areas, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So Gen Con meeting went fantastic. It was one of those things where when I left the room, it was all I was thinking about on my entire walk back to that. I had to get back to my hotel room and do a massive brain dump because I just only have so much space in this head. So if I don't get it all out on a piece of paper, I get it out on an email, I'll just forget what I wanted to say. So I was really amped up about it. A couple of weeks after that event, my friend Paul, the owner of Games and Stuff, was hosting 2 of their designers and the person that's working on the digital app for the game. I flew down there. I didn't realize it, but I had a handful of locals that were going down there too. They had some demo opportunities. We got to play 2 different versions of the game. There was a starter deck and there was a slightly advanced version of the game to get a little bit more under my belt for that. And that's kind of where I came back with this old school, original OG playmat that nobody probably has anymore, and they probably are embarrassed that I'm including in the video today. But that's how old school I am, as old school as you can be when it comes to this thing. From there, I had a couple of different opportunities with the game. I went back and forth with the company. I was allowed. I flew out to Paris for their Kickstarter launch event weekend, which had a handful of people from Europe and a handful of content creators from America as well. We got to participate in playing the game, learning the game, a little bit more advanced play, building out decks, being part of a faction, and running sort of a mini tournament inside of this pub. It was fantastic. And then when I got back, we hosted a handful of road shows. We've been lucky enough to have Tim Keefe, who's really well known in the UVS community. He's managed to get a bunch of creative cards. Just a fantastic person to have running the events that's hosted our road shows. We have our last one before launch is coming up on the 27th. So if you're in the area, come in and check it out. We'll have a bunch of demo decks and some promo cards that we'll be giving out. And feel free, if you're in other areas, to go onto their website under events. You can take a look, put your zip code into the little browser, and it should show you on that form. Now, not everybody's up on the site right now. I say that because as of last night, we weren't up there, but part of that problem was that I had submitted for a kit and Tim had submitted for a kit, so they were confused. And I was like, just send us 2. And they're like, well, we're not going to do that. At that show, Fantasy Flight was already demoing Star Wars Unlimited down there to much success. I think the burn on Star Wars was a little bit slow early on. There was a lot of people at the tables, but I don't think it got the pop that they thought it was going to get out of Gen Con. I think that sort of picked up a little bit more after they attended PAX Unplugged. When I talked to people at Asmodee, they were surprised at my reaction, and there were a whole bunch of reasons that I liked the game. The technology piece was fantastic, but the gameplay itself was something that was a little bit different. Again, it's not anything that's extremely unique. If you're a card game player, you're probably familiar with a bunch of the things that are happening on. The uniqueness of it is it's not a combat-focused game. It's really diverse in terms of faction play and the characters and the heroes that you're seeing in the game. And it's a game about exploration and not combat. So you're trying each turn to move your hero token closer to your companion token, as opposed to just fighting directly back and forth with your opponent. It's a game that plays back and forth. So it's I do something, your opponent does something, and we go back and forth with each other until we're done with our actions, and then we resolve. And we resolve based on the total number of power that we have in the particular landscape that we happen to be in. Some of them are mono region, so there's forest, mountains, water, and some of them are multi-region, so they're forest and water, they're forest and mountain, that sort of thing. And depending on who has the most power in that particular zone, they move closer to their goal, which is to move to the center of the board. There's some interesting other areas as well. Your characters clear at the end of your turn, with the exception of two of them. Two of them are allowed to go to your reserve, and you're allowed to, at any point during your next turns, be able to play them from your reserve one more time. So characters go away at the end of each turn, but some of them get put in your reserve, and they stay there until you decide to play them one more time, and then they go back to your yard. So there's a lot of back and forth. There's a heck of a lot of game in there. For those of you familiar with Magic, Gabriel Nassif, Yellow Hat, he's been involved with the game a lot, doing testing and things like that. He's had a lot of positive things to say and good influence, and his pedigree for Magic the Gathering is pretty significant. I mean, he's one of the oldest, longest running Pro Tour players that I can think of from the European side of things. I felt really good about the game. I have an ability to pick hits. It's the only reason why I'm here and I'm in this space. It's from making better picks than bad picks. When it comes to looking at and determining games and seeing if they're going to be viable for the market, it's one of the things that I do as good or better than anybody else when it comes to that sort of stuff. And it's allowed us to grow here. And I've only been held back by a bank account that's not unlimited. Hopefully after this game comes out, it can be a little bit more unlimited. So everybody on the team is fantastic over there on Equinox. They are remarkably humble, or at least the last time I talked to them, they were humble. Maybe that attitude has changed after they become the largest crowdfunded Kickstarter for a TCG ever, over $6 million taken in on that. But all of the people from their team that I've met have just been fantastic and super passionate. Eric, the CMO, is the person that I've probably spent the most time interacting with back and forth through emails, and Eric is wonderful in that he listens to what I have to say, and I have a lot to say a lot of times, and he's really good about taking notes and making adjustments and responding to me in a way that makes it feel like he's not just pushing my suggestions and ideas aside. The rest of their design team has been fantastic. I spent a good amount of time with Merlin, with Francois, and with David when I was in Baltimore, and then again in Paris as well, and Charles and Marcus are just great. The only boots on the ground American that they have on the team thus far that I know of is Justin Parnell. Justin Parnell is going to be handling their organized play. He comes from Star City. He was involved with Star City and Star City events and had some Magic experience and different things there. So I'm interested to see what sort of structure he brings to organized play. We've had some conversations back and forth. We talked and met in Paris, and then we've had some conversations through Discord as well. Thus far, my experience has been amazing. I will say that I'm not going to say that they've made no mistakes throughout this process. I think it's impossible, given the nature of how big of a project this thing is, to not make any mistakes. There's a lot of moving parts. You're doing a TCG for the first time. You're not attached to any sort of IP or license that a lot of TCGs sort of fall on now, So if we look in our space realistically, the only thing that's not IP attached, aside from Magic and Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh, that have sort of created their own IP, is Flesh and Blood. And Flesh and Blood's a fairly competitive card game. They've managed to build their own IP out through lore and different things like that, and Equinox is doing the same thing with this world of Asgartha, and It's pretty wide. There's a lot of lore that's there. When you get the digital app, each of the cards has lore attached to it as well, so you'll be able to see exactly what's going on in there, or there'll be a scene from that. And they've talked about down the road potentially, producing some books or things like that to sort of be a compilation of what the lore is and move forward with everybody understanding, because sinking your teeth into the world is super important for when people want to be involved in a game. They want to understand, like, whether we're playing our favorite characters in Star Wars or One Piece or wherever they are, you want to feel like you have a relationship to the characters that you're playing, and the diversity of the factions does a lot for that. Some of it can be fairly standard tropish stuff. You've got a military faction, you've got a warrior faction, you've got a druid faction, you've got those sort of things, but the elegance with which they present those are part of the thing that draws you in. The artwork is just amazing. To move on from there, 39 card deck, 1 hero. You're going to have 3 uniques at most. You're going to have 15 rares maximum, and you're going to have 21 commons minimum. So that's how you get to your 39 card deck. You can have at most 3 of any card. That card can be spread out through 3 different rarities. That doesn't mean that you can have 9 of any card. That means that you can have 3, but you can have 1 unique, 1 rare, 1 common. And when I say uniques, I mean unique. Every 8 packs, you're going to open a pack, and one of the cards in there is going to be unique, and it's absolutely a 1 of 1. That card is the only one of that card that exists. There are no other cards like it. It will have different stats, it will have different costs, it will have different abilities, it will have different mechanisms on it, but it will be the only one in the world that exists that does that particular thing. There's a few different relevant videos that they've done since the last time I had the conversation about this game, which is why I sort of wanted to update this one. In May was they talked about their roadmap in general. A lot of people focused on during the Kickstarter, and a lot of people have focused on with the game in general, is the digital stuff that they're doing. So to give sort of a high level, easy pitch on that, essentially what happens is every single card in the game has a unique QR code. You're going to have an app. The app's going to go live on the 18th of this month, so a couple of days. You're going to be able to scan in those cards that you get from your packs, and it's going to go into your digital collection. And from your digital collection, you're going to be allowed to do different things like add foils to it. You can trade those with friends. You could sell them on their marketplace. If you sell that digital card, digital asset on the marketplace, they also have a print-on-demand service where you can print and have the card mailed rather than having to mail the card through. I don't want to get focused too much on the digital side of things because it's a little bit further on. I think the gameplay and how good the game is a lot more important. But in general, they've moved back the marketplace and the print-on-demand from launch. And I think there's a really good reason for them to do that. They focused mostly on making sure the Kickstarter was out and delivered and getting product in people's hands. And they're going to worry about the digital side of it afterwards. You don't need the digital side of it in order to play the game. You need the digital side of it to scan to make sure that nobody can take your QR codes. But aside from that, you don't actually need that to play the game. You're just going to sit down and play. You don't need a cell phone to play the game. It's just simply for collection purposes and to use the marketplace if you decide to use it, and print on demand if you'd like to use it. So it's not something that they have to do. The exciting part is they announced 4 or 5 days ago, Eric did a VOD, and he talked about Kickstarter stuff being delivered. They said they were going to deliver their Kickstarter in early July. They missed that by a little bit, but not by too much. The early July date they're going to be really close to hitting. So they've said that the European people have their shipments have started for the game. What they're going to get for product has gone out there, with a single caveat being that if you were somebody that pledged both for the cards and for the accessories are going to take a little bit longer. So they're not going to ship the accessories separately, because that would be just a disaster logistically for somebody that just shipped, I don't know, thousands of free RPG Day kits. Having to go back and just ship one pamphlet in addition to those giant boxes that were like 32 pounds would not be cost effective. It would kind of crater the entire thing. So if you're somebody that has accessories attached to your shipment, that's going to take a little bit longer for them to get those boxes out to you. But everybody else will have their stuff in the next couple of weeks. So they're saying end of July for America, as well as early August. So they'll probably be shipping around Gen Con. We'll start seeing those show up at the store. We'll start seeing those show up at people's homes. And those will obviously be the Kickstarter versions, which have the extra booster pack in the box. They're hotter packs. The rarities are juiced up on those. You'll have uniques that are going to come a little bit quicker. They've got all the alternate art that they had in the Kickstarter as well. They pushed their general release of the game up 2 weeks from what they thought it was going to be. So instead of being in mid-August, it's going to be in September. So General release for the game is going to be on September 13th. There's a whole bunch of different launch events that they're going to end up doing for those things. So as a store, you're going to be allowed to run it either with 1 starter and then 3 boosters, and you can make whatever deck you want to make out of that with using 3 factions, or you can just do a traditional standard sealed, which is you open up 7 booster packs. You pick a hero, so you'll get 1 hero per pack. You pick one of your heroes out of there, and then you're going to construct your standard deck, your sealed deck, out of 3 different factions inside of that. So you'll have your faction from your leader, and then you'll have 2 on the side that you'll get to add into there. Standard construction rules in terms of size of the deck apply, so it's actually a 30 card deck as opposed to a 39 card deck. So something to keep in mind. If you happen to be at Gen Con, they are at booth 1109. So if you're familiar with the Gen Con layout, when you walk into the convention center itself and you go towards the back where the actual layout of the hall is, they're sort of right in the middle there. Asmodee has a giant area over there. They have a long, skinny booth. And in the booth, they sort of have 2 different things going on. They've got one section that's just going to be a learn to play. So I think it's $2 or a generic ticket. You can sit down, they'll teach you how to play the game. I'm not sure if you get a promo card or not from doing that, but you'll get to be able to play and experience the game. And then they have 2 types of events that are going on. One of them's buy a starter deck, play in the event. There's some prizes that happen from there, and you get to sort of move on. So it's a couple rounds, or they haven't really talked about what the format of it is other than you're going to grab a standard starter deck, and you're going to play against somebody. So I'm signed up for that. It's the only Gen Con event that I'm signed up for right now. Saturday 3 p.m. slot, I think, is when I'm playing in that event. So that's cool. And then they have booster draft as well. The booster drafts are sold out naturally. It's the only way to get the product ahead of time, really. They announced that they're doing Cartamundi printing in Europe, and they're actually using a company called Ludifact to do digital printing for America on all the American stuff, which I think helped them speed up their timeline quite a bit. The interesting part about Ludifact is they're actually in Lafayette, Indiana. Lafayette, Indiana is a 55-minute drive from Gen Con. So for them to get some product down and stuff should have been fairly easy for them if they had it across the pond already. Or I'm sure they're probably making a drive as a team up there to kind of take a look at what the operation is if they haven't already. So that's probably where those booster packs are going to end up coming from. We'll end up getting our Kickstarter sometime in the next couple of weeks. We have a significant amount. It's the largest Kickstarter that I've ever pledged. It's the single largest buy that I've ever done on a trading card game ever, which is mildly terrifying, but I'm excited and enthusiastic about it as well. They did talk about how people sort of expect a pre-release kit experience. They said that second set, that's not going to be the case. They're going to change the format. They're going to let you use 7 boosters, but there's going to be some additional kind of cool add-on product that goes with it that Eric was a little bit cagey about. He didn't want to get into spoiling it, so I'm sure it has something to do with the storyline. So you'll have your 7 booster packs of set 2, and then you'll have this cool additional add-on thing, and you'll build your deck out of that. And then they said on set 3, they're going to have a traditional pre-release pack kit sort of thing that you'll be able to play with that are more normal in what you're used to. The other thing they talked about is they're not going to have a judge program out of the gates. I think the focus on the game is a little bit more casual in nature. I don't think there's a lot of complexity in the rules. If you take a look at, they don't have a lot of timing stuff. There's not a lot of responses or things like that because it's you're playing something and your opponent's playing something. You're reacting to different things, but there aren't a lot of timing issues that come into play in general for the game. So that should be easy enough to figure out. And what I've learned about the game is oftentimes if I just read the card, it actually tells me what I want. When I was down learning the game in Baltimore, I would ask them a question and their answer to me back would be, well, how do you think it would work? And I said, well, this makes the most sense. And they're like, yes, that's how it works. So I was like, great. Now I've got a significant amount of card game experience, but I think in general, the game is pretty intuitive. If you just read what the card says, it tells you. In the cards, what's cool about the cards, and this is sort of based on the way that their algorithm had to work for their uniques, is the cards talk about themselves as if they're themselves. So when I come into play, I do this thing, or when another creature comes into play, this thing happens and stuff. So they talk about themselves sort of in the first person, and what it did was it made the algorithm easier for them to do their uniques so that the uniques didn't contradict language and different wording. Worlds events they talked about, most likely it looks like Worlds is going to be in Paris. It could be anything from as small to just an 18 to 16 player thing to some sort of a juggernaut monster of 3,000 players and all this crazy stuff. But it's one of those things where, I think I've talked about it before in other videos, organized play costs a company money right up until it doesn't. And what I mean by that is, initially when you're starting off your organized play, you have a bucket of money that you're allowed to be able to use for promotions and tournaments and things like that. And as the game grows more and more and more, that bucket gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you're allowed to do cooler and cooler stuff. So I think they're being cautious early on to set any kind of unrealistic expectations, and as things become known to them and they get a little more locked in, they'll let us all sort of know what's coming when it comes to that world. They've been very good about that. One of the things that they're not shy about is doing an AMA or having some interaction, and they're really good about answering questions that they can, which is another thing that was sort of attractive to me. The other thing that Eric touched on in the video that I thought was the most important thing that he said, and not that it was a throwaway comment because he certainly leaned into it, but there was a conversation about supply. And I think anybody that's playing TCGs right now that's in this marketplace, if you're playing something that's super popular or top of mind relevant, supply is an issue. Whether you're a Lorcana player, One Piece player, if you're playing Star Wars Unlimited, you can't get set one packs right now unless you want to pay an exorbitant amount. And I think early on, you have to decide how much you're going to print really early on, because it takes a long time. And it's exacerbated a little bit by the fact that there's only so many printers. Printing is really hard. In order to do well with printing, you basically have to have printing presses that never stop. And unless you have a lot of work lined up, that's really hard to do. And with a market being the way that it is, with the number of TCGs that are out there and the number of cards that are being made, it's hard for a newer game to sort of slip into the queue and jump in. You know, if you're in the middle of printing Magic and you've got a Pokemon set that's coming, and you go up to them and you're like, we want this little French company, we want to just jam ourselves in the middle of that thing. And they're like, nah, we'll see what we can get to it and stuff. But, you know, they've managed to work with Ludifact, and they have Cartamundi over on the European side as well that they're working with. And who knows, maybe they'll end up changing printers at some point, or they'll move some things around. But whatever it is they needed to do, they got that part of it done. And that's a heavy lift. It really is. If you're a retailer that missed the Kickstarter, I wouldn't worry about that. And part of the reason why I wouldn't worry about that is, Asmodee's got 2 or 3 different really nice programs that they have that are launch event programs, so you can see a bunch of tokens and a bunch of doodads and stuff that they're giving you to host the event. The other thing too is there's alternate art stuff that's in the Kickstarter set that isn't in the regular retail release. And in some cases, and obviously art is subjective, I feel like the artwork on the regular retail launch is better than what the Kickstarter alternate art is. So as somebody that's going to play this game, I'm going to buy boxes of both. The Kickstarter boxes are a little bit hotter in terms of the rares and different things like that, but the actual release of it, the release product is really solid as well, and the game is just going to explode. So if you haven't looked at placing an order with Asmodee or talking to them about the different packages they have, feel free to. To go back to what I was talking about with Eric, because I kind of lost my train of thought, he said they're leaning into supply. I think what they did was they took a look at what the market space looks like. And what he said was really specific in that if we don't have enough confidence in set one to be able to do stuff, and there's going to be a shortage and stuff like that, our opportunity to be able to grow or to be able to hold the community, I'm paraphrasing here, is going to get hard. And it doesn't take a lot to go on the TCG Players Marketplace and take a look at how often that occurs with set one stuff. So if you take a look at set one pricing for boxes for One Piece, it's the highest. If you take a look at set one for SWU, it's impossible to find. If you take a look at set one for Lorcana, it's the most expensive. So in those 3 cases of the most recent games that have really hit the TCG space hard, all of them have had product shortages. Now, I'm not going to say, because I just won't at this point, that there's not going to be any product shortages for Altered. I think that there's probably still a chance, regardless of what they printed, that there will be some chances for them to have a product shortage. I wouldn't wait. This isn't the type of thing that I would sit on the sidelines and wait for it to be popular, because if you just experience waiting for it to be popular from SWU, you probably ended up with none of the first set. And if you waited for One Piece to be popular, you probably don't get the allocation that you could have gotten. You know, and if you didn't figure out Lorcana, you probably are in the wrong industry. But at any rate, we all got shorted on that one, and it's just a disaster. But the first set's carrying really well, even if the middle 2 are kind of dumpster fires. Some questions that I always get asked, and so I just try to handle them up front, is where do I think the players are coming from? I think the players are coming from everywhere. And what I mean by that is I think that this is the style of game that will attract first-time card game players. I think this is the style of game that could potentially eat into market share for every other card game on the market. I know that a lot of the people that showed up to take a look at the game in general during the roadshow were Flesh and Blood players, as an example. And Flesh and Blood players tend to be known because Flesh and Blood is a fairly competitive game. They wanted to see what the interactions were and the mechanics were, and they left pretty satisfied. So they tend to be the hardest judge when it comes to something having enough oomph to it to be able to hold their attention. And I know our local Flesh and Blood community is pretty excited about it. The same thing. I think it could come from Digimon. I think it could come from SWU. I think there's a lot of opportunities in where they can collect players from, outside of the fact that there's going to be a whole batch of players that come in and they experience it because it's beautiful for the first time, and they're not familiar with what a TCG is, and they sit down and they play it, and they can be competent at it after a game or two, which is nice. It's not so wild and so difficult and so many keywords and so many mechanics that anybody can't figure it out. There's a couple of symbols on the cards. There's a couple of keyword mechanics that usually have reminder text on them, and there's not a lot going on in the framework of what's going on with a card. Doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of different things you need to think about, but in general, it's a fairly basic game in terms of being able to look at that stuff. Now, I say that with all these different zones behind me that they have with areas where cards can play, so there's certainly a lot of different levels that they can play with, which is another thing that I'm excited about for the next couple of sets. Any concerns? Sure. From the content creator space, there are not a ton of people that are producing English content for this game. Dan is still doing it from Main Deck. He was out there kind of early on. He was in Paris with me. He was at George Lucas Stadium, although he was on a different schedule than what I was at. So we didn't meet each other there. We met each other in Paris, and he's got a podcast for it and some other stuff going on. There's a newer content producer called Trickster. He put up a few videos. He's actually cast a couple of online digital events because it's available from TTS has an app on it, so if you want to play it digitally, you can go on there. Board Game Arena has some stuff. There's a handful of different ways to play it digital. Dicebreaker was carrying it. They were in Paris as well, but they folded when Reed Pop sort of sold out their media arm. And most of the coverage now is coming from Europe, which it stands to reason that that's the case. The Equinox is based in Paris. They have done a huge grassroots push for this game. If you take a look at their Kickstarter, there were a little over almost 50% of the pledges of the 14,000 people that pledged were from France. Paris was the number one city on the pledge with 1,100. So almost 10% of the pledges came from Paris, which stands to reason. They're a company that's based in Paris. The US had about 20% of the backers. That said, Montreal still had higher pledges individually than any other US city, which isn't uncommon. We're pretty spread out with our metas and things like that. So we'll get a handful of people here and a handful of people there. So there's a number of people that I've talked to that have asked me, are you concerned that all of the pledges and that many pledges were coming from Europe? And the reality of it is I'm not. And the reason why I'm not is the US market still is the market where you want your TCG to hit, right? So the Asian market is really solid. They have a bunch of card games over there that we don't have over here, and vice versa. But the US market sells more card games than any other market in the world. So you want to be in the US if you're going to sell this game successfully. Usually Europe lags behind Asia. And in this case, if Europe is ahead of us in terms of the desire for it, and they've got that market down, that actually bodes well if it's a solid game and the US picks it up, because they're going to be even further ahead than what they are right now. So I'm interested to see, maybe this video is about 2 weeks or 3 weeks ahead of itself. I think coming out of Gen Con, there's going to be a whole bunch more content producers that are going to be there, that are going to start making some stuff for this game, because it's going to be out. People are going to be able to touch the cards. They're going to be able to feel it. There's going to be 72,000 people at Gen Con that are going to walk through and notice that booth and want to figure out this game. So I think I'm a little bit ahead of the curve on this one when it comes to that sort of thing. In fact, one of my very first video on here was sort of one of the top videos in terms of watches out of anything that's been produced on the English side of things for Altered so far. So I'd say there's a whole lot of opportunity for them to be able to get more content creators up and running. I know they talked about having some media kits and things like that being sent out around launch. So I'm interested to see how this thing is going to grow. Again, it's currently the only ticket that I have for Gen Con. So I'm excited to be able to sort of wind my convention down and be able to play the game. I love this game. I'm going to sell a whole ton of it. and I think that the market is going to gobble it up because the timing of it's pretty good. There's some other games that are sort of waxing a little bit during this process. Their fan base is waning a little bit. Like, you know, the last time I had this video, we were carrying Battle Spirits, but we got rid of Battle Spirits. Dragon Ball Fusion has fallen by the wayside for us. Digimon has sort of picked up and dropped and picked up and dropped. Shadowverse has sort of done the same thing. I think there's a giant opportunity for this game. Lorcana's cooled off a little bit. The last couple of sets certainly haven't been what the sets before them were. Magic's obviously doing well. Like, Magic Bloom Burrow is going to do great, so that'll hold a lot of attention and stuff as well. But I think the eyeballs that come in to look at woodland creatures casting spells and Magic is actually just going to help this game, because the look, the brightness of the world, that sort of thing is going to be attractive as well. So I'm going to wrap it up with that. Next week I'm going to come back. Should be same bat time, same bat channel, back to our normal time. I'm going to talk about Gen Con next week because it just makes sense. We're all going to head out to Gen Con towards the end of next week, so I'll be on here and I'll talk about sort of a basic guide for retailers when you're going to Gen Con. And as always, we'll do 30-minute AMA at the end. So happy gaming, everybody. Thanks.